West County. My name is Riley Scheider. I'm an 8th grade teacher at Northwest Middle School in social studies, and so I'm going to be doing our wrap-up unit on Andrew Jackson today for about 15 minutes. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about what you guys did last week and how what you did last week is going to connect to what you did this week. So last week when we got together, we talked about Andrew Jackson, the person he was, from being an orphan to a military leader to then the representative of the common man, 7th president of the United States, and we talked about how he became kind of a polarizing figure, or somebody who was, when you look back at American history, kind of challenged on how he's remembered. And a couple of the big things that we talked about that I wanted to review was the first thing we said was we talked about Andrew Jackson and the spoils system. When he became president, he implemented this thing called the spoils system. Now, the spoils system is this system of belief that when a president becomes president, they have the right to kind of clean house or fire some people in the previous president's cabinet so that they can hire people who are loyal to them and people who are their supporters, with the idea that if you hire people who are your supporters, your government's going to work better. And so Andrew Jackson, we talked about, implemented the spoils system. He's one of the first presidents, if not the first president, to implement it. It's one of the things he's famous for. He said he was doing it to get rid of corruption in the government, and he said he was doing it because it would make the government easier to run. Okay. Another thing that we talked about was how Andrew Jackson opposed the national bank. This was one of the huge things that Andrew Jackson believed. One of the things that he believed most was that there shouldn't have been a bank in the first place, was that the Constitution didn't outline a reason for having a bank, and so as a result, he hated national debt. And so one of the big parts of Andrew Jackson's presidency was he vetoed any government spending, and he vetoed the rechartering of the bank because he wanted to give power back to the states. That was one of the big things that we focused on last week. We also talked about Andrew Jackson and the Nullification Crisis. The Nullification Crisis was this kind of four-phase conflict between the national government and specifically the state of South Carolina. Basically, the national government wanted to support the North and so created a tax on imported goods. And those goods were being shipped from Europe to mainly southern states, one of them being South Carolina. And South Carolina basically said, I don't want to pay that tax, because if we pay that tax, we're paying more money for something we can get cheaper from Europe. And Andrew Jackson said, well, you have to pay that tax. You're a state. States can't reject orders of the national government. And he actually got an act passed called the Force Act, which forced South Carolina to have to pay that tax. And eventually, after a lot of negotiation, Andrew Jackson and South Carolina came to a compromise, and the tariff got slowly reduced over 9 years. But the big part we talked about the Nullification Crisis was this idea that Andrew Jackson used the federal government to make sure that states couldn't step out of line. And that's going to set us on a pattern for when eventually you learn about the Civil War. It set the country on a pattern of what was federal authority and what was state authority. And then the last thing we talked about that's going to connect to what we're talking about this week was Andrew Jackson and the Indian Removal Act. Andrew Jackson had this responsibility as president to try and figure out how could he responsibly take care of Americans who are white settlers while also trying to expand America in a way that was legal. And so there were these white settlers trying to take Cherokee land, specifically Cherokee in Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina mostly. And these settlers kept on getting attacked by Cherokees because they were stealing land. And Andrew Jackson wanted to come up with a way to get the Cherokee off that land. And so he came up with in Congress as well, the Indian Removal Act, and helped get it passed. The Indian Removal Act was an act that said that Indians had the ability to relocate to west of the Mississippi River. This would be like in modern day Oklahoma. And so what happened is, in the Indian Removal Act, these natives were encouraged to relocate. Now, encouraged doesn't mean forced necessarily, but it was strongly encouraged without kind of like a threat or pressure of military force. And what we're going to talk about this week, though, is this thing called the Trail of Tears. Now, before we get to that, and our review of whatever, you guys had an assignment. Your guys' assignment last week was to answer questions related to Andrew Jackson and the Jacksonian era that you guys see right here. And then your other job was to create a chart on Harriet Tubman and Andrew Jackson, basically asking the question, who should be on the $20 bill, Andrew Jackson or Harriet Tubman? And what I wanted you guys to do is I wanted you to justify your opinions, because you guys had learned about Harriet Tubman already. You guys had learned about Andrew Jackson from this lesson, and this is actually something currently in dispute. This is something where it's already in legislation proposed for Harriet Tubman to be on the $20 bill. And so I wanted you guys to have some input on that. And so what you guys did was you were supposed to come up with at least 3 reasons for Harriet Tubman being on the $20 bill, and at least 3 reasons for Andrew Jackson being on the $20 bill. And then you were supposed to respond in the middle of that chart. And so what I did was I went ahead and created my response too. So you guys are here seeing, I didn't give you guys my opinion because that's okay. Everybody has opinions, but I wanted to see what you guys said. So right here, you're going to see Harriet, some reasons you could have had for Harriet Tubman and some reasons you could have had for Andrew Jackson. So let's go through those real quick. First, Harriet Tubman was a slave who helped people escape to the north on the Underground Railroad. So she was really brave, she was heroic, and she helped slaves escape to the north, which is a very admirable trait. She was also an abolitionist, which meant she helped former slaves and people in the North raise awareness of the idea that slavery should end all around the United States and be outlawed in the United States. That's mainly the responsibility of abolitionists or the position they held. She also, if she were put on the $20 bill, would represent a woman on U.S. money. The only other woman on U.S. money is Susan B. Anthony, who helped fight for women to get the right to vote. But she is on a coin that has been around since 1999. That took a little bit of extra research, but I was able to figure that out. She would also be the first black leader or African American on U.S. money, which could be another reason to put Harriet Tubman on money, because our country is diverse, and therefore our currency or our money should reflect how our country looks. That was an argument you could make for Harriet Tubman. And then also there's the argument to be made that Andrew Jackson maybe shouldn't be on our money, and some would. Andrew Jackson shouldn't be on our money because he has a checkered history and made decisions that hurt American Indians and was kind of known for his temper. So you have like reasons for Harriet Tubman and reasons maybe why Andrew Jackson wouldn't be a good choice. But then on the flip side, you also have Andrew Jackson. You have Andrew Jackson, who was a president, the 7th president of the United States. You could say that Andrew Jackson helped the country get out of debt for the first time, so that would be a reason to put him on our money, to remember that and to remember what the value of money really is. You could also say he represented the common man. He's the first president who wasn't an aristocrat. So he was an everyday person, and kind of this idea of the American dream of you can work your way into earning everything you own. Andrew Jackson is a huge symbol of that in American culture. And then also, you could make some arguments for Andrew Jackson that go against Harriet Tubman. Like, one of them is he's been on the money for a long time. There's probably not a reason to take him off of the money if he's been on the money for a long time. Like, maybe that's a reason to keep him on. And another thing you could say is he was involved in banking somehow. At least Andrew Jackson went to war with the national banks. He fought to limit government spending. That could be a reason to push for Andrew Jackson to stay on money instead of Harriet Tubman too, because Harriet Tubman, while she might have been heroic, didn't have anything to do with money. So I don't know. You guys had some opinions. I'm sure some of your families did too, and it was probably fun to talk about and share those. But those were some reasons for Harriet Tubman. Those were some reasons for Andrew Jackson. So I hope you kind of enjoyed doing that activity. Now, as we go to this week, I had some things I wanted you guys to think about for this week. So specifically, this is your assignment that you would have picked up or you saw in Canvas this week. And it kind of capitalizes or goes a little bit further on what we've already talked about with Andrew Jackson. So this reading actually comes from your textbook. So I took this out of your textbook because I thought you'd all have a resource for it, or you have it here right now. But what I'm going to ask you to do, and the instructions say, is read the excerpt below and answer the questions about the Trail of Tears. Try and remember the lesson from Andrew Jackson and see how you can connect your answers where possible. So how can you connect what we've done before? And answer questions in complete sentences and cite answers when possible or prompted. So basically what I did in what I'm asking you to do in this assignment is I'm asking you to read this primary source, primary meaning it was from somebody who was actually there, and I'm asking you to say, what did John G. Burnett see when he was at the Trail of Tears? What did he actually see and write down of the experience of seeing the Trail of Tears? So if you look at question 1, it says, complete the following sentences in the resource above. So the person writing this excerpt is a blank. I'm asking you, who are they? What do they do? And then I'm asking you to figure out what their job is during this time. And then I'm asking you to say, how does the writer describe what he sees during the Trail of Tears? Then if you look at number 2, I'm asking you to go and look for connections and try and describe conditions, but notice number 2 says cite 2 examples. So that's a key point where I'm asking you to find evidence in the text so that you know you're 100% right and cite your examples. The only other kind of tricky question is I ask you about number 4. It says make an inference based on your reading and knowledge of U.S. history. This is worded really similar to TCAP questions, based on reading and knowledge of U.S. history. So what you're trying to do here is based on what you know. You're trying to say, based on the text and what you know, how can I identify what's going on here? Because there's some big stories happening in this excerpt that aren't just in the words. You kind of have to read between the lines, and that's what that question is asking you to do. But that's a lot of what history is taking what you see and reading between the lines to figure out what else is going on. So you're going to be historians as you do that. So I'm going to go ahead and read this excerpt so that you can have somebody read along with you, and then I'm going to sign off. So here we go. Account from Army Interpreter Private John G. Burnett. Story told in 1890. I saw the helpless Cherokee arrested and dragged from their homes and driven at the bayonet point into the stockades. Bayonet is the knife that you put on an end of a gun. And in the chill of a drizzling rain on an October morning, I saw them loaded like cattle into 645 wagons started toward the west. One can never forget the sadness and solemnity of that morning. Chief John Ross led in prayer, and when the bugle sounded and the wagons started rolling, many children rose to their feet and waved their little hands goodbye to their mountain homes, knowing they were leaving them forever. Many of these helpless people did not have blankets, and many of them had been driven from their home barefooted. On the morning of November 17th, we encountered a terrific sleet and snowstorm with freezing temperatures, and from that day until we reached the end of the fateful journey on March the 26th, 1839, the sufferings of the Cherokee were awful. The trail of the exiles was a trail of death. They had to sleep in the wagons and on the ground without fire. I have known as many as 22 of them to die in one night of pneumonia due to ill treatment, cold, and exposure. Pneumonia is a disease that attacks your lungs. Among this number was the beautiful Christian wife of Chief John Ross. This noble-hearted woman died a martyr to childhood, giving her only blanket for the protection of a sick child. A martyr is somebody who dies for a cause or dies for a reason that they think is noble. So here's what I'm asking you guys to do. I'm asking you to take what we just read and try and answer those questions below. And also remember to try to connect it to our Andrew Jackson lesson. You need to go back and watch the YouTube video from the week before. You're totally able to do that. Also be able to use any internet resources you can find. But I know I speak for all your teachers. We really miss being around you guys. And so I hope that you understand this work, and I hope that you can learn from it. Just know we miss you and that you guys are awesome. Signing off.